Hello, everybody. I am Jonathan, host of the Undeniable Culture podcast, where we talk about the business of creativity. Today, I have Renee Short. She is an associate creative director for a global in-house agency. She never set out to be a writer, as most writers don't, but has gone on to write for newspapers, magazines, corporations, agencies, and more. Renee has also been mentoring other writers for about 5 years and dreams of publishing a children's book. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I am really excited to talk to you. We've worked
Thanks.
together for maybe a year, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, a little bit more, I think.
And
Yes.
I'm always super intrigued by your process and copywriting, and I do a little bit of it, but I'm always fascinated when we get a final product and we deliver it to a client and they're like, yes, this is cool. So I wanted to talk to you about copywriting.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about how you might define copy for those who might not know what it is.
Yeah. Surprisingly, I get that question a lot. Not everybody knows what a copywriter does. And honestly, if you had asked me at the beginning of my career, copywriting was just that, writing copy. So copy is just a fancy way of saying words. But really, the industry has changed so much since I started. It's, not just copy, now it's content. Now there's SEO involved in the way that you write that content, the way that web has grown, and now taxonomy on websites, the words that you pick to categorize the products on your website matters for how people find your product. So it really has changed from what I think used to just be good grammar and good sentence structure and copy that was clear and understandable to as technical as you want to be, depending on what kind of position you're in. So it's copy and copywriting can mean a lot of different things depending on where you are in your career and where you are, with your company.
Yeah. And most companies are looking to kind of engage customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where that content creation piece comes in.
Yeah.
So how much copy are you working on for different channel types, right?
Oh my gosh.
Website, videos, what's your mix?
A lot. That's something else that has really changed. We used to have just print and direct mail and in store and outdoor, and now the majority of what I'm writing these days are websites, web content, social media. A ton of what we do now is social media, and then video. I mean, man, talk about up and coming, and then some. Like the video channel seems to change as much as social does, and it just keeps becoming more and more important, and it's short form and it's long form, just like any other kind of writing. I find that short form is actually a lot harder. I think most writers tend to agree it is easier for me to write you a page of copy than to distill that message down to a tweet, because you can only pick sort of the most important, most impactful. So you really have to be skilled to be able to write across all of the channels that there are now, but it's mostly digital.
Yeah. And that short form, you really have, time, the amount of time you have to deliver something so that it remains engaging, kind of the pace of social media is so quick. How do you deal with that?
It's difficult. It really is. Because as a writer, you tend to, at least I do, fall in love with your words a little bit, right? Like it's your art form, it's your expression, and adjectives are your best friend. And there's really not a lot of room for like what I call fluff when you're trying to grab someone's attention. If I hear the goldfish analogy one more time in my career, of goldfish have a longer attention span than humans or something, some variation of that. But it's, it really depends on the medium. With audio now, we're seeing people will sit and listen to somebody talk for over an hour. Getting them to read for that long is a little bit different, but it's still content, no matter how you look at it.
I'm surprised on how many times I decide to watch a 3-hour podcast or a stream even, and not watch like a movie that's been scripted and delivered in a cohesive way. And I think that's just where the future's going, which is interesting.
Yeah. And then, when web first started, not that I was around at the beginning of the web, but when it really started picking up for content creation, it was all short form, get as short as you want. And then the blog kind of came up and it was like, oh no, now people want long form. And you really do have to have the skill set to do both. You
Mm.
sort of have to pull people in with the short form, but then you've got to make sure that you have that deeper dive that people are looking for, especially if you're trying to sell a product. You got to make sure that they can research it and feel comfortable with it. And honestly, even, there's a book that I always recommend to people called Everybody Writes
Mm.
by Anne Handley. I have a major girl crush on her and her weekly newsletter. She's an amazing writer, but she's really great about how do you, that idea of how do you draw them in at the beginning with as few words as possible, as clear as possible. And then remember that kind of everybody in your team or in your structure impacts how that content comes across. So even if you're not a copywriter, I do want to acknowledge that yes, we have a specialty and not literally everybody can write, but to a certain extent, everybody in your team and your department impacts, how it's designed helps the message come across a certain way. The kind of visuals that you put with it, how you lay it out on a page where the headline meets, the subhead. In that way, everybody kind of impacts the writing, even if they're not the ones, coming up with the words.
Right, right. And you and I have worked a lot on our projects for nonprofits, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've worked on nonprofit projects, and that is a question I always have when we have an interdisciplinary team, designers, developers, copywriters.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen this really funny meme where it's like, does copy come first or does design come first?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What do you think? What's the relationship
Oh man. I mean,
there?
it's the eternal struggle. It is the chicken and egg. For me personally, I think copy comes first, but just barely.
Mm.
And it's always your crappy first draft, right? So I dabble in design. I will never call myself a designer. I have found when I work, and then the people that I've worked with most of the time, it helps to give them something to work with in the design, particularly, if I'm thinking about advertising, a headline.
Mm.
To have that headline in mind when they're designing, not only to help inspire the visuals, but literally just for space. Like, how many words do I need to be able to fit on this page? But then, man, after the copy comes first, it is back and forth. So that's why I say it comes first, just so that literally there's some building blocks for a designer to start working with. But if that's your final draft, I hate to break it to you, you're doing it wrong. It should always be back and forth. Okay, how are those words working with the image? How is that design working with the copy? Could it be shorter? Could it be more clear? It shouldn't just be short for the sake of short, right?
Yeah.
So I constantly, my designer friends, it's, can you cut the copy? Can you cut the copy? That's the ongoing question. And it's, you can, but you've got to make sure that you're cutting it for clarity and not just for space.
Yeah.
Because if you lose your message in the meantime, it doesn't matter how pretty, it looks on the page if the message isn't clear.
Yeah. The draft, when you put it together, and I'm just amazed how many times we throw a copy on a design and then it's like, all right, we need to edit the copy.
Mm-hmm. Every time. It's always more words than it needs to be at
Yeah.
first. And I don't know if everybody would agree, but I find that it's easier to cut later than to add. But it can be tricky to edit your own work. I mean, it's really beneficial to have either another writer if you've got the luxury of multiple writers, but even your design partners, ask them as a user, as part of a target audience, hey, what words on here are not adding to the message for you?
Right.
That kind of fresh set of eyes or that outside opinion, because like I said, you can fall in love with your own words really, really easily.
Yeah. Do you find that headline writing for advertising is
So hard.
so hard?
So hard. I mean, again, because it's short form. Like
Yeah.
you don't get the benefit of sort of explaining yourself. So if you only have, max 5 or 6 words to get your point across, that's where a lot of your energy goes. It's not the body copy, it's not the subhead, it's not the blog. To be honest, even writing, long form articles for SEO, you typically have the benefit of those keywords or those key phrases that you're, trying to tell a story around. But a headline, and you're kind of on your own, other than, depends on what's in the brief.
Yeah.
And it is rare that you hit gold the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Anything really. I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
This is like long form, right? But even
Mhm.
this, I had to think of what the title was and what the
Yeah.
intro was going to be. It's a little bit scripted. And
I love it.
it has to be a little bit punchy because
Yes.
people are maybe the first time they're seeing what the podcast is about.
Yeah.
And you really have to think about every single word, what it means, why it's going to matter to the end user.
Yeah. It's like real estate. Like that's you only have, so many spaces and you've really got to make them work as hard as you possibly can. And it really depends on, are you trying to sell a product? Are you trying to tell a story? Are you trying to, get somebody engaged and hooked to come over to the website?
Yeah.
It's, how cheeky can you be? The most fun clients are the ones that let you get away with a little bit of sass, as I call it. Those headlines tend to be a little bit easier to write, but humor doesn't always work. And like you said, a lot of the nonprofit clients, it's a more serious kind of
Yeah.
business model. I know you guys recently won an award for the Shalem Hospice Care. That one was a little bit of a challenge to write because I do tend to write in a little bit more of a like fun and lighthearted space.
Yeah.
And obviously hospice care is not a fun and lighthearted space.
Yeah.
But it was a really fun opportunity to stretch myself. And I found that I really enjoyed that kind of work still. Even though it was serious, it was heartfelt, it was meaningful, and it you get that sense of, and this is working with any nonprofit, the sense that your words are making a difference for someone somewhere, right? It's not just selling a product. And that helps, at least for me, be a better writer.
Yeah.
When there's sincerity involved, I feel like the words come a little bit easier.
Yeah. That was really, we had to speak with compassion, right? It was speaking to family members and people who are going through some tough times, right? And you need to have, this organization feel like it cares for that person, that family. And we did, I think the way that the copy came together with the design and the development so that it felt relatable to anybody who came on the site, all of that in combination is what got it to, an award-winning website.
Yeah. I think, most writers that I've met, I know you mentioned it in the intro, don't necessarily set out to be writers. We do tend to be rank really high in the empathy area. So I think that also makes it a little easier when you can put yourself in the client's shoes and then also the audience's shoes, being able to empathize with the message the client is trying to get across, but really with the target audience and what they're looking for in a situation like that, having that empathy. You guys talked about it on the design podcast, like that research phase too, of digging in and what is it like to be that person, either making that purchase or looking for that service. So having a high empathy quotient definitely goes a long way.
Right. So how do you develop, the voice for clients for a project, and how does that differ from tone?
Yeah. Oh man, you're asking all the good age-old questions. Coming up with brand voice is one of my favorite, right? Because it's designing the personality of the brand, and I always kind of explain it as brand voice is who you are. So are you fun and lighthearted and carefree? Are you a little bit more compassionate and serious and kind of a shoulder to cry on? Are you really technical, and it's about results and data? That's kind of the brand voice. I describe tone a lot as like inflection. So who you are doesn't change. So I'll use myself as a person, for example. I'm pretty fun, I'm pretty lighthearted. I curse like a sailor. That's my core, my brand voice, but my tone may shift depending on the situation. So if I'm posting a vacation picture on Instagram, my tone is going to be a little bit different than if I'm writing a cover letter for a resume. It's still the same kind of words that I would use. It's still my personality, but my inflection may shift a little bit. And that to me is the difference between sort of your core brand voice, who you are as a person, as a brand, versus different channels or different mediums. You might shift your tone depending on your audience.
Yeah. That format that you were talking about, the way that you have to change your tone, right, is so imperative when you're talking about social media. The inflection you have for like Twitter may be a little bit more funny, and Facebook is a little bit more professional and Instagram's a little bit more fun and stuff, right? And
Yeah.
those are generalizations. It's different for from client to client, organization to organization, but it's so important to give it the right um, differentiation amongst all
Mm-hmm.
your channels. And that's why, they tell you, you need to post something a little bit different on all these channels.
Yep.
Sometimes that's easier
A
said than
pain.
done. Yeah. Because you have a piece of content that you feel like, oh, this would be great anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the subtle differences is what makes you stand out compared to your competitors.
Yeah. It's rarely universal, unfortunately, because the volume of content that you have to come up with now to be able to fulfill all those channels. I mean, there are clients that we've recommended that they not try and be on every single channel because either they don't have the resources to properly support it, so it's sort of like better to not do it at all. Sometimes it's because the business model doesn't make sense on certain
Yeah.
platforms, but you really, if you want to have especially a social and digital presence, you've got to be ready to churn out content that's at least tweaked for those different channels, right? An Instagram reel is not the same as a YouTube video.
Yeah.
So how do you use the core of the content you have? Yes, slice and dice it, but make sure that you're paying attention to the nuances of those channels and the nuances for the audiences, right? Like you may um, sell one product to a certain kind of audience or service, and there may be another part. So I think Shalem's another great example. While the website really needed to be kind of family facing for the people making those decisions, we also had to make sure that it was appealing and clear to the doctors who might
Mm.
be recommending them as a service. So there's kind of a dual audience that you have to balance, and that's the case most of the time. You're rarely talking to one target audience. That would be ideal,
That
but
would
it's
be
but it's
so
rare.
ideal.
So even your tone, may have to shift depending on who you're talking to and depending on where you're talking to them.
That gets a little bit into kind of the process of developing new ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep in mind who you're speaking to, right? Any good
Yep.
presenter, and that's really what it is. It's a presentation to convince somebody or tell somebody something
Yeah.
important. How do you generate those ideas? What brings you into that state of mind?
Boredom. So I am a strong believer. My best ideas, my most killer headlines, my epiphanies have always happened in the shower, driving my car, or falling asleep. And I've actually done some research that when you let your brain sort of go on autopilot, so something like taking a shower or driving, or fully relax, like that moment right before you fall asleep, that's where your brain is unoccupied enough to be creative.
Hmm.
And so once I kind of identified that pattern, if I'm ever really stuck, I know we talked about writer's block, but even just trying to get that first kind of idea, there's all this information rolling around in your brain from the brief, maybe from some brainstorms that you've had with your designers, but having a moment of boredom, true boredom, monotony is where, at least for me, all my best ideas happen. It's if you let your brain do its thing and not try and overthink it, that tends to be, at least for me, where my inspiration strikes. I
Yeah.
will recommend more books because I think to be a good writer, you should probably read a lot. The Science of Storytelling is a really, really good one by Will Storr. And he talks about if you are communicating, but it's not in story form, you're really not communicating at all. The human brain wants there to be a story. And it takes a minute for your brain to connect all those dots, like from a brief, and turn it into a story for yourself.
Yeah.
So then you can communicate it as a story out to other people. The other one is Elizabeth Gilbert. She wrote Big Magic, and it's a book about how creativity, big ideas sort of find you. And you have to be ready for them and you have to be open to them, but that there's this kismet kind of involved. And you don't, for me at least, it's hard to observe or to absorb that kismet when you're so busy doing a million other things. So that's where I feel like if you really can't write, go wash the dishes, go do a lap around your yard, whatever it is, quite literally clear your head, and it will be surprising what will come to you sometimes.
Yeah. the book Hey Whipple Squeeze This. Have you read that book?
No, I love the title though.
You should read this book. It's about advertising and writing for advertising. So
Yeah.
writing those headlines. And I just love a tidbit in the book where he's like, yeah, so like a copywriter for advertising is just staring at your, desk partner's shoes, looking at a pencil for like 30 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
2 hours, 5 days,
Mm-hmm.
and then going, oh, that's an idea I could use.
Yes. I mean, man, that's copywriting in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Occasionally an idea will hit me, right off the bat in a brief meeting or something
Mhm.
like that, but most of the time I literally picture it like some like file keepers in the back of my brain, like sorting out the information and connecting the dots, and then all of a sudden it comes to the front of your brain when you give it a minute and you're like, oh, that's it. Like that's the idea.
Yeah.
Or at least it's the crappy first draft.
I feel that. And, when I'm onboarding a project, right, I've had a conversation with the client and I've asked them, what's your issue? What's going on? How can we solve it? I've kind of crafted what I think is the best solution.
Yeah.
But in that process, I have to be thinking about what is that brief going to look like so
Yeah.
I can deliver it to each, the designer, the copywriter. And you're right. You have to tell a story, even in the brief stage. You have
Yes.
to tell the story of why this is needed. You have to say, who the client is and what is their story. All of
Yes.
our target markets, we try to like formulate a story around one person.
Yeah,
see if
like a persona. Yep.
right? That way you can kind of see that person's face as you're writing
Yep.
or designing.
I mean, that's where the empathy comes in. Persona work has come so far. I mean, the amount of research that we can get, data on people now, but being able to kind of force that empathy,
Yeah.
super important.
Writer's block is real.
Very real.
You,
Yeah.
you mentioned it, we've talked about it, and how you get past it, I feel, is always unique and interesting for each writer
Yeah.
and each person that has even a creative process, right? For
Yeah.
every creative, there's kind of like you hit a wall and you need to get through it. What is your process?
I mean, other than the boredom thing, so, kind of forcing myself to do something mundane, I also find handwriting a lot. So rather than typing up my notes or, because a lot of times when I'm writing, it's just strings of words that then I go back and sort of form the story and form the sentence. But I'll do word clouds, but handwritten. For some reason, there's something about the pen to paper and the hand actually moving. I heard something the other day, I don't remember where, but it's about how it slows you down. Like the forced slowness of handwriting kind of, again, gives your brain a minute to process what you're doing. Where the typewriter is the typewriter. Typing. Typing makes you, your hands can go faster than your brain can move sometimes. So
Yeah.
handwriting seems to really help me force boredom and mundane. And then reading. I really do, even if it's just picking up a book and reading a couple pages, trying to find a blog or an article online, looking at how someone else puts the words together, because it's unique, regardless of who you are, will sometimes spark, something. If you have the luxury of walking away for a day, that's best case, but, deadlines sometimes
Yeah.
determine the amount of time we have. That and not being afraid to put your crappy first draft in front of somebody. Like I said, if you have the luxury of another writer, but if not, just get somebody else's opinion. What word is working, what isn't. You might have a great headline, but it's too long. Have them help you edit it down. I am not an advocate of writing by committee. Where literally there's too many cooks in the kitchen, too many stakeholders paying too much attention to every little word, because I do think there is a profession, right?
Yeah.
It is my profession where there is an expertise, just like you wouldn't go to a designer and ask them to change their kerning. Like that's not, that's the designer's space. Yeah. But I do think having input and bouncing ideas off other people can go a long way, even in just getting your brain to think about it differently.
Yeah. The copy by committee is always rough
So
sometimes.
rough.
And especially because you want, your clients to have input and your clients want to have
totally
the team to have input. And that's really important, I feel. But at the end of the day, there's got to be somebody who makes the final call. Like, yes, this is the right thing. This is this is going to serve us at the end of the day.
Right.
Because as much as I wish a website could be the solution for everything, it really isn't. It's
Right.
like a small piece of a bigger entity, a bigger process of communication. And I feel like that gets lost sometimes when people are like, I want my website to do this and this and this. And I'm like, you're not going to make it do that.
Yeah. I mean, the customer journey now, it's almost not even a mappable thing anymore. I mean, there used to be, this very like specific cyclical process that people went to. And now it's like your point of entry as a brand can be 15 different places.
Yeah.
It can even be a point of entry that you don't control. It could be somebody else writing a blog about your company. So that journey can be really tricky to nail down.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's even more reason to be sort of cohesive and how important it is for that voice, even if your tone shifts, for that voice to sound the same so that it's clear when it's you and when it's, someone talking about you, even trying to impersonate you. Crazy things happen now.
Yeah. Yeah. You really have to have what I call a worldview
Yeah.
to understand client journeys and understand where people are. As much as I look at, personas and I try to research, I also look at my own life and I say, okay, what is it that I'm doing when I'm purchasing my products at
Yeah.
Whole Foods or Costco or Walmart or whatever? What are the trends that I have? And then I look at kind of the people around me and I'm like, okay, so they are kind of doing something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Right? How important is that worldview for you?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's always been important. I think the light that has been shown now on how diverse people thought they were being
Yeah.
and probably weren't. I mean, I even look back on some of the stuff that I've written, not realizing that my worldview was really narrow, and not that it was wrong, but it wasn't as inclusive as I thought that it
Yeah.
was. I write a lot of beauty and lifestyle content. That's kind of been my deal for a long time, and looking back now at some of the stuff I wrote early in my career, again, not that I ever wrote anything offensive, thank goodness, but just particularly with makeup, writing something as simple as, oh, it's perfect for all skin tones.
Yeah.
That's rarely true. There is rarely a beauty product that is truly perfect for all skin tones. Writing about foundation, like makeup foundation, has been turned upside down on its head because, in a good way, all of these brands have now come out and addressed, that they didn't have enough shades for everybody, and to sort of pretend that you did
Yeah.
was okay for a really long time. And I know, I had to write for a product launch for a foundation, and it was really important to me, even though I was the head writer, to make sure that people of different ethnicities and different worldviews and different backgrounds were checking my copy for me. Am I using words that are less inclusive? When I'm talking about how tan your skin is that the word that every culture would use? Is it more about how deep your skin tones are? Like, really wanting to make sure that not inadvertently, right, that I was like
Yeah.
excluding others. So I think having a personal worldview is super important, but it's also acknowledging that your perspective is limited by the life that you've led. And so particularly on sensitive things that you may be writing about, hopefully you've got a diverse crew around you at your company or your agency, wherever you're working. That can be tricky because you don't always reach out to a friend, a counterpart on LinkedIn. But that would be my biggest piece of advice, is if you're writing and you truly need to be as inclusive as possible, you can't fake that. You can't, there's only so far empathy will take you in that sort of situation. So it's just recognizing your limitations and your limits to your worldview, and making sure that you're bringing in other voices, people that don't look like you, didn't live your life, to kind of gut check that what you've written is appeals to them, works for them, and tells a story that they can relate to.
And that's so important to have those individuals who have that different background
Yes.
in your circle, and that channel of communication is open.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it really does change what the work product is at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And it's tricky, right? Because you have to balance, yes, I want your voice to be heard in this, but I also, especially if it's a coworker and that's not their role, it shouldn't become their burden,
Yeah.
right? So how do you balance making sure that you have a variety of voices? Because again, you really can only fake that so far,
Yeah.
but making sure that it doesn't become, I'm sure there's a word for that, but like that you're not leaning on those people where you're becoming a burden, right?
Yeah.
Like
Like you want them to know that you're wanting to make your product better,
right.
And you want to include them, but it's not something that you're just trying to dump on them, and it's their
Exactly.
responsibility for
Right.
whatever the end product is.
It's got to
And
be authentic for sure.
yes, authenticity is always really important to me when we're working on anything, because
Yes.
I feel like that's what people connect to.
Yep.
It's if you're authentically trying to be a good citizen in the communication space
Yeah.
that we live
Yeah.
in, then I feel people feel that.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, you know, people can see through marketing and advertising
Yeah.
now. I mean, maybe they could before, but it's not the Mad Men days anymore. And you hear a lot of companies talk about authenticity, talk about inclusion, and it's typically pretty easy to tell whether is authenticity a marketing strategy or is it true to the core of their culture.
Yeah.
And there's usually you can tell the difference. It's very hard to fake authenticity. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the definition of the word, but there's a lot of companies that are trying to right
Yeah.
now.
It's like manufacturing that sense is, I don't know, it's just so wrong to me. I find that
Yeah.
where I thrive as a marketer is, you know, you're already doing something cool, amazing. We just need to find a way of amplifying that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do we make other people see that it's as cool as we know it is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Renee, it's been great talking
Thank
to
you.
I love talking about this topic, and I feel like I know a little bit more about you and your process. And for me, copy has always been this mystical thing, you know, these
Yeah.
words get created and you're like, oh, this is cool. But it's fantastic to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been really, really fun. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you for listening today. We hope you enjoyed learning about our guest today. Head over to undeniableculture.com for more. There you'll find episodes as they come out. Stay cultured, and we will see you next time.